I like to go on a lot of solo adventures, primarily in forests or nature areas that I find interesting. But I'll also go to urban exploring areas, like abandoned spots and stuff. A very common way I do this was just by browsing through certain subreddits or online forums for less known about spots. And I'd never had anything even remotely unsettling or bad happen before this. Although, what happened on this trip, I honestly can't even fully process still, almost 4 months later. On one of my go-to subreddits, I found a spot that I thought looked interesting. It was a post with basically zero traction, and the OP described the spot as this area in the forest that had several scattered caves, or cave openings, all around. He said like 10 to 15 openings, which sounded really cool. Only thing was that it was kind of a far hike, which meant I had to pack my camping gear and spend at least a night out there. I thought it was worth it though. I drove 3 hours to a section of a national forest. Obviously, I'm not going to give an exact location, but it was very remote. The trailhead wasn't even a real trailhead. It was 4 miles down a sketchy dirt road that basically just ended. No parking area or turnaround spot. It was just a dead end that supposedly was where the trail started. But there was a faint footpath going into the forest, so I just pulled into the grass off the road and parked, then grabbed my bag, double-checked everything, and headed in. I'm not entirely sure how I could tell, but somehow it was very clear to me that nobody else used this trail, not frequently at least. I'd been on plenty of older, lesser-used trails before, but this one seemed different. This one felt different, like I was entirely alone in the whole forest, in an eerie, uncomfortable way. But I kept going. Took several hours before I got to the point where the OP had marked for where the start of the caves was. And right in the middle of this small clearing, there was a medium-sized tent. It looked abandoned, like all dirty and hardly standing up. No one seemed to be around either. Honestly, I can't think of many things more disturbing to find abandoned than a tent. Now that I've had more time to think of it, the only real reason a tent would ever really be abandoned is if someone needed to leave in a hurry. Like just grab their bag and run, because the tent is the only thing that takes a while to pack. So, what did this person run from? I was stupid to not think more on this while I was actually there. I passed it and started heading toward the side of the mountain, where there was a large rock face and on it were several openings. A few of them were small that I'd have to crawl into, so I didn't bother with those. But there was one much larger opening. It was actually one of the more hidden ones, blocked by a bunch of trees and bushes. I stood at the opening and took out my flashlight. The wide opening very quickly narrowed into a tighter, almost tunnel-like passage. Sort of like a mine shaft, but definitely a little bit bigger and not man-made. The flashlight reached pretty far, but even still, at the end of the light, it was just pitch dark. And with only taking a couple steps in, I got this horrible gut feeling. I stopped, and after a second, I made probably the only good decision of this entire trip, and I left the cave. I went and looked into a few more, but I just had a bad feeling about them, and ultimately chose not to enter any of them. I was still walking around by the caves and trying to decide whether to camp by the other tent or to just go off the trail somewhere and set up, when suddenly I heard something. It came from the larger main cave entrance. The sound was echoey and distorted, almost like a mixture between a laugh and a scream. It wasn't loud enough to give me a jump scare, but the way it sounded definitely unsettled me. I had no idea what made that sound. It kind of sounded human, again like a laugh or a scream, but it also kind of didn't. I really just don't know. And afterward, it was silent. I only stayed another 30 seconds before just moving back to the trail. I kept looking over my shoulder, still feeling something was really off about this place. I walked an hour down the trail before the sun started getting too low for me to continue reliably following the path, and so I just set up camp right alongside it. I got my tent up and didn't even bother with a campfire. I really just wanted the night to be over with and to get out of there first thing in the morning. Of all the remote, strange places I'd been to, this was the only time I'd ever had this sort of bad gut feeling, so it felt like it had to be for a reason. I stayed inside my tent for a couple hours, laying down and waiting to fall asleep. And then, pretty suddenly, as I was laying there, I started to get really uncomfortable. The kind where my body was telling me I needed to look around to make sure nothing was out there. I hadn't heard anything, though. The feeling really just came out of nowhere. But there was another part of me that really did not want to unzip my tent and look out, though, knowing it was going to be extremely dark and probably just make me feel even more uneasy even if I didn't see anything. After 5 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. It was like this really strong, suspenseful tension feeling that I needed to get rid of. I unzipped the tent and looked out into the dark. Immediately, I felt a spike of fear unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. Down the trail, toward where the caves were, someone was standing there. And after a second, I noticed more people, just standing there loosely grouped together, and they were all maybe just 20 feet from my tent. They definitely saw me. It looked like they had been there for a while, just observing me. I quickly grabbed my bag and jumped out of the tent, not bothering with taking it down or even grabbing any of the smaller things that I had outside of my bag. All of them just watched me. And I could see them moving, like subtly shifting in place, and their heads turn every time I moved. So I know they were real and not just some weird shapes in the dark. I started backing up, going down the trail, but still facing the group, scared to look away for even a moment. Eventually, I was far enough back that I couldn't see them anymore, and that's when I turned around and started hurrying. The path was very difficult to follow, so even going quick wasn't actually that fast. And while I can't prove it, I'm 100% sure I was being followed the whole way. I never actually saw them again, but I could feel that they were still behind me, staying just out of sight. I got back to my car and was thankfully able to get out of there. I don't know what it was that I stumbled across near those caves, or who those people were, or what had happened to the other hiker that had left their tent behind. I do really believe, though, that if I'd gone inside any of those caves or tunnels, I would have never left. This was last summer when me and my two friends, who I'll name Corey and Tyler, went on a camping trip in Montana. We were all just a bunch of college kids that enjoyed the outdoors and drinking around the campfire. This trip was by far the most ambitious of the ones we'd done before, though. It was a 5-ish hour hike to get to our spot, and it was not a real campground area, just a flat spot near the base of a mountain. Every other time, we'd pretty much drive somewhere that we could just camp just down a short trail from where we parked. This felt a lot more like actual camping. The first full day we were there, all of us were convinced we'd never do anything differently ever again because of how nice it was to be alone out there. No other people around, and just hanging out, being as loud as we wanted all night long. A type of freedom that we hadn't had much of before. We stayed up and had some beers around the campfire until like 1 a.m., which was pretty late for camping. Then we all got in our tents and passed out. An hour later, I woke up. All that drinking had my bladder feeling like it was going to explode. I got up, still half asleep, and walked out of my tent to do my business. I went just 30 feet into the woods, not trying to stray too far from the tents because it was pitch black outside. When I was done, I zipped up and was just about to turn around, but saw something ahead. I didn't notice it before, so I guess my eyes must have adjusted a bit in the dark, but someone was standing out in the woods. They weren't moving, and after squinting and looking for a few seconds, I was pretty sure it was Tyler. I looked for a little bit longer, thinking he had to have been using the bathroom too or something, but he legitimately wasn't moving at all. I walked over and started calling out his name in a whisper. "Tyler? Hello? Tyler? What are you doing?" He didn't answer or even move an inch to show he heard me. I looked past him at where he was looking, but there was literally nothing out there. It was just complete darkness. When I got up right beside him, I sort of peered around to look at his face. His eyes were open, but his face was empty, like no expression or anything. Kind of like he was sleepwalking with his eyes open. At least, that's what I assumed it had to be. "Tyler? You good? Let's go back to the tents. Way too dark to be wandering around right now." Tyler still said nothing. I reached my hand out and just touched his shoulder, thinking maybe I could lead him back. But he instantly snapped out of it and just stared at me. Couldn't tell if it was a scared or angry face, but his eyes were wide and it honestly really freaked me out. Then, after a moment, his face fell back into nothing, and he just walked back to the tents, getting in and zipping it up. After a second, I walked back and got in mine, but I didn't really sleep well for the rest of the night. I was in and out every 30 minutes, still weirded out by that interaction. I told myself it had to be sleepwalking, which was still fucking creepy to me, but realistically probably harmless. In the morning, when everyone came out of the tents and started talking, it was clear that neither of them knew about last night. Like Tyler was just his normal self, chatting and goofing around, and Corey seemed to have slept through everything. I guess Tyler could have known or remembered what happened, but if he did, I wouldn't think he'd be acting so normal, which made me sure it really was just sleepwalking. So I didn't bother bringing it up and just tried to forget it. The rest of that morning, we just hung around the campsite, having already walked so much yesterday. Around 6, when the sun was getting lower, all of us got up and started collecting some more firewood for the campfire tonight. We were just casually walking around, grabbing what we could find and tossing it back toward the campsite. Still talking to each other, but not right next to each other. We were all gathering sticks in different areas around the campsite. And I don't remember what exactly was said, but Corey made some sort of stupid remark, and I jokingly called out to Tyler, asking what he thought. But Tyler didn't respond. I looked around and found him standing on the other side of the campsite. He was standing in place, staring out into the woods, eerily similar to how he was in the middle of the night. Only difference, of course, was that there was no way he was sleeping, or sleepwalking, or whatever. I looked over at Corey, and by then, Corey had noticed it too and called out Tyler's name. Then we both looked at each other in confusion and started walking up to him. Corey kept saying his name, sounding increasingly more concerned. But this time, right when we got up to him, he suddenly turned around and responded, asking what we wanted, and looking at both of us like he was confused why we were calling out his name. I just stared at him, but Corey asked if he was okay. Tyler said he was fine, and the whole time he and Corey were talking, I was watching Tyler's face, and I genuinely think he did not know why we were concerned. It was like he didn't remember or process the last minute of us yelling his name and walking up to him. Dude, we were yelling at you for a while. You were like spaced out or something. Are you sure you're good? He nodded and looked at us like we were being weird. I looked behind Tyler toward where he was facing before, and it was just empty woods again. Nothing was out there. Now, I think it probably seems weird that after this, we all just continued collecting sticks and sat around the campfire, drinking again and enjoying the night like nothing had happened. But this was just 1 minute of weirdness, and really the same thing with what happened that night. Both of these strange interactions I had with Tyler were just short, random things. The entire rest of the 2 days that we had been out there, hiking and at the campsite, Tyler was completely normal, nothing off at all. So these couple of random, strange occurrences with him seemed to just be that. Definitely weird, but not anything to really be worried about. Anyway, we sat around the campfire pretty late again, and got in our tents around 12-ish, though I don't remember ever falling asleep. I laid awake, tossing and turning, trying to get comfortable, but for whatever reason, my body refused to go to sleep. And eventually, after probably 2 or 3 hours, I had to use the bathroom again. Honestly, I was trying to hold it for a while, because I didn't want to go out there, but after some time, I just said screw it and got up. The whole forest was quiet, and when I looked over at Tyler and Corey's tents, they were both zipped up still. Then I walked up to the same spot from last night, and this time, before doing anything, I stood there and waited for my eyes to adjust, looking all around at the dark. It only took 15 seconds for my eyes to focus enough for me to notice a shape right out where Tyler was standing the night before. What the hell was he doing out here again? I immediately started walking up, calling out Tyler's name. I got about halfway there before I slowed down and then stopped in place. That wasn't Tyler. Now that I was a little closer, I could tell the figure looked different. The way they were standing and everything, that it was not Tyler. And they weren't looking into the woods. They were facing me. I froze, like my body just locked up, too scared to move. Then, all of a sudden, everything just shifted. The figure in front of me was gone, and I looked to my left. Corey's hand was on my shoulder, and he had this look of concern on his face. He said he heard me calling out for Tyler, and when he saw me and asked if I was good, I wasn't responding. The fear I felt in that moment, realizing how f***ed this all was, I genuinely can't even put into words. I told him we had to leave immediately, that someone was out here watching us. I didn't know how else to really explain it yet, thinking if I told him everything right then and there that he might not believe me. We went back and woke Tyler up, and although Tyler didn't admit to seeing anyone during his strange episodes, he was oddly okay with just packing up and heading out in the middle of the night without any real explanation. Not saying he was lying or hiding something, but I don't know. We packed and got our flashlights out, keeping watch and hiking back to the trailhead. Took almost 8 hours, doing most of it in total darkness before the sun came up. We had lots of talks about what had happened at the camp in the days afterward, and honestly, even today, a year later, we still talk about it, but we don't have any answers. Even still, Tyler claims he had no recollection of seeing any figures or people in the woods watching us, or even really thinks he ever was just staring out into the woods at night like I'd seen him. To be fair, I didn't remember hearing Corey calling my name or walking up to me, but I still remember and know what I saw. Regardless, I wish I could give some sort of explanation or answer to what happened out there, but I genuinely don't know. I live on a large property with woods covering pretty much every acre of it. My house was the last one on the block, and it backed up to a section of the forest owned by the government, so it was essentially free for anyone to go walking or camping in. Every so often, I'd go out there with a tent and just some basic gear and camp for a night or two, just for the fun of it. I'd never go very far because I was always worried about getting lost. I wasn't really a real camper, I guess. One weekend, toward the end of fall, I decided to head out and camp for a night. I threw together all of my stuff and walked just 30 minutes into the woods, finding a decent clearing that I could camp at. I was only there for an hour, just having finished getting everything set up and making a small fire ring, when out of the trees, a man walked up to my campsite. He was average height, mid-20s, and had noticeably long, oily hair. It looked almost wet, like he hadn't washed it in weeks. And he looked nervous. He then asked me in a very dry, emotionless voice if he was close to the Forest Service road. I said not really, assuming he was talking about the one that was probably 5 or so miles from where we were. The man looked around nervously and said okay, not explaining himself or anything, and just walked back into the forest. I didn't even notice until afterward, but for that 30-second interaction, I unconsciously had my hand in my pocket, holding tightly onto my flip knife. I didn't think that I was that worried or scared, but I guess I was. Something about him didn't seem right, and I couldn't think of why he'd ask something like that, other than if he was lost. But if that were the case, why didn't he say so? After I saw him walk away and another hour went by, I tried to stop overthinking it. I started up a campfire and sat down, eating a small snack and watching the sunset over the trees. A sort of calmness fell over the woods as soon as it got dark. And while usually I loved it, this night I was kind of on edge. And it seemed like it was probably for good reason, because around I think 9:30, as I was there sitting by the campfire, all of a sudden I heard a voice. It came from maybe 100 feet in front of me, from the absolute darkness. And I thought it sounded a lot like the man who had come by earlier in the day. But what was so disturbing and horrifying was that he had called out my name. I stood up and looked at the darkness, feeling vulnerable, knowing that he could definitely see me by the campfire, while I couldn't see him at all. Then he called out again. His voice sounded weirdly like he needed help, but still none of it made any sense. I stepped away from the campfire and up to the darkness, trying to get close enough to see him. As I did, the man kept calling out. Then I found him. He was off in the trees, standing just in the middle of the dark, facing me. And when I saw him, he stopped yelling. There was a full 10 seconds where he didn't move or say anything, before I softly, in a very shaky voice, asked what he wanted. He stared at me, although I couldn't really see his face. And after a second, he asked me if he was close to the Forest Service Road. Not only was what he said the exact question he asked me earlier, but his voice was so creepily similar too. It was almost uncanny how exactly it sounded like the way he had asked it before. Every word and inflection, the dryness and lack of emotion, was the exact same, like he mimicked his own voice. And as I stood there, disturbed and really creeped out, I noticed something. This person in front of me didn't have long hair. Again, I couldn't see any real features or anything of their face or body at all, but I could still tell that they didn't have hair hanging down near their shoulders, which was one of the distinctive features of the man that came by my campsite. Whoever was in front of me, with the exact same voice and everything, was not the same person. Come to think of it, they might have been slightly taller and just different looking all around, but it's hard to say for sure because of how dark it was. But the whole voice thing was enough for me to go into a complete panic. I ran back to the fire. The person started calling my name again. I didn't know what to do, but when the voice started sounding like it was getting closer, I decided to just run. I left everything behind, my tent, backpack, and everything. I knew it was a straight shot back to my house, and so I didn't stop until I made it back there. I didn't sleep at all that night, and in the morning, I was terrified to go back to the campsite. I knew I had to get my stuff though, and when I did eventually go back there, everything was still there. Nothing stolen or missing at all. I never went camping in the woods behind my house after that. I swear, even just looking at the tree line at night gives me a really unsettling feeling, like something is out there watching me. I do have a theory for what I encountered out there, but I think it'll only make me sound like I'm crazy, so it's not even worth sharing. For my own safety, I plan to move out of this house and far away from that forest in the next few months. So hopefully I don't have any more updates.